another area that I find particularly interesting and I like focusing on quite a bit is men's mental health and male suicide. So, what's the current situation regarding men's mental health in Ireland?
Well, I prefer to talk about suicide because the figures there are much easier to grasp, and they give probably a clearer picture of what's happening. We don't actually focus on mental health because that's much more difficult to measure.
Yes,
but in regard to suicide, thankfully, the male suicide rate has been in decline since 2017, and this decline has happened generally as well. For women it has fallen as well. The male suicide ratio, which was 4-1 stubbornly for a number of years, and was even higher, reached levels close to 5-1 at one point, that has been in decline since 2017. The ratio is now closer to 3-1. We know from research in the UK that men undergoing separation or divorce are particularly at risk. They are at much higher risk than men in general. And this has to do with the outcomes in the family courts, which often make rulings which can have the effect of separating men from their children. And this can have a devastating effect on a man's life.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes against that idea that like a lot of dads are kind of deadbeats and they don't care about their children, when if you actually look at the damage that being separated from your kid can cause, it definitely shows that that's not the case.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just another red herring. This is another one of those false accusations that are hurled against men, the fact that so many deadbeat dads. In fact, the figures for deadbeat dads are quite low. And yes, they have been looked at, and they have been, and that allegation has been entirely refuted, I believe. But as to what we would like to see done about male suicide, in the first place, going back to mental health, that continues to be underfunded in right across the board generally. So there needs to be a change in that respect. In regard to male suicide, I've already mentioned that men undergoing divorce or separation are particularly at risk. And this has to do with the outcomes in the family courts. So it means that changes have to be made in the way the family courts are run in order that men are not separated from their children, or that they don't find access to their children very difficult to maintain. This is one of the premier changes needed.
So, okay, so the next topic is, I will say, an interesting one, but it hasn't been one I've really looked into that much, is men with regard to homelessness. So what's the current situation around that?
This issue was clear-cut in 2016 when we started out. But it has changed since then. It has changed because of the shortage of housing, which has been taking place progressively since 2017, and which has impacted on thousands of people. So that the focus today is much more on families who cannot or who have been cut out from rental accommodation, or else families who cannot maintain a mortgage or get a mortgage in the first place. This is where the focus is now. Having said that, we do know that the great majority of rough sleepers are men. Now, these are often men who have been made homeless in the first place, either that or have lost contact with their family, or have been made unemployed. And there are virtually no services available in order to allow these men to resume their role in life, have a meaningful role in society.
So, what do you think would be the best way to kind of improve that situation?
The connection between homelessness and judgments in the family courts must be properly investigated. And if there is found to be a connection, then proper measures must be put in place in order to deal with that. The situation with regard to rough sleepers, as I have said, is that they may be men who have been removed from their homes, who have lost contact with their families, or who have become unemployed, and they feel that society has lost any interest in them. There needs to be services put in place to help these homeless men or these rough sleepers to get back into society and to assume a meaningful role once again.
So going into the last subject area would be unjust laws. Now I'd say there's quite a few to list off. So what's the current situation regarding some of those unjust laws in Ireland?
Well, I've already mentioned some of them. The Family Law Act 1995 is one which discriminates against men, but there are others. The Victims of Crime Act 2017 appears to be prejudiced against the accused person, and it appears to favour the complainant. For example, what happened with the Victims of Crime Act 2017 was that there was a subtle change made, and the word complainant, or the term complainant, was replaced by the term victim. Now, this appears right throughout the Victims of Crime Act 2017. Now, this is a change which we believe is guaranteed to prejudice the case against the accused person by calling the other person the victim. And so that needs to change. There is a Domestic Violence Act of 2018 which provides for an emergency barring order under which a man can be removed from his home by a person who is not a spouse or a civil partner, but is a person with whom he has had what's known as, or what they call an intimate relationship, which again is not specified, which is not spelled out.
It's not properly defined.
No, it's not properly defined, which allows the man to be removed from the home while the complainant actually remains in the home for at least for a certain length of time. That too is something that must be remedied. So these are examples of some. Finally, I should mention again that there must be laws put in place to prosecute people who make false accusations, and terms of imprisonment must be handed out to those who do make them.
So, what do you want to see happen with regard to solving the problems that are caused by unjust laws, and how would you deal with the laws themselves?
Well, briefly, the unjust laws must be repealed. That is, and I've mentioned several of them already, but this will be an enormous task.
Yeah.
It will require, in my estimation, a National Men's Council to be put in place, and it will require an enormous effort by a great many men and the women who support them to do so. It will also require a change in public opinion.
Yeah.
And that means that there must be a change in the media as well. This will hopefully bring about a change in society, which will then be taken up by the political parties. And that's the way we see it. I also finally should make reference to the Istanbul Convention. This Istanbul Convention was put in place in 2019 without a word of discussion in the Oireachtas about it. There wasn't a single article in the newspapers to debate the issue. It was smuggled in by stealth, as it were, and it became law. To my mind, it is the quintessence of the kind of poisonous ideology which has informed state policy and the media in the last 30, 40 years. It needs to be thrown out.
Yeah, so yeah, I think the biggest thing with that is it's not just about dealing with the laws themselves, because there's a system that's created those laws. So if you get rid of the laws, that system will just create more laws that are just as unjust. So it's you also have to kind of deal with the system itself.
You have to deal with public opinion.
Yeah.
You have to bring about radical change in public opinion, and this will require an enormous effort, as I say, over many, many years. It will be resisted fiercely by those groups who constantly are in the driving seat and who don't want to see these changes implemented. So it will require an enormous change.